will have the last panel session before the final break on circular economy from inspiration to implementation, hosted by Janet Pao, the director of the Economist Corporate Network in Hong Kong. This session is sponsored by Aspire and also supported by Redress. Thank you both for your support. Please welcome Janet and the speakers.
See you. Okay, we're okay. We have a. Good afternoon, everyone. Our session right now is called Circular Economy, From Inspiration to Implementation. My name is Janet Pao, and I'm the director of the Economist Corporate Network in Hong Kong. And I serve senior executives based in Hong Kong of multinational companies who are very concerned about sustainability issues. So I'm really pleased today to have 4 business leaders here to explore with me this topic that is on top of mind for a lot of people. And at The Economist, we have been actually talking about how following the pandemic right now is actually like watching climate change with your finger jammed on the fast forward button. So in a way, the pandemic and climate change have some similarities, and they also interact with one another. And the pandemic forces us to also think about the effects of climate change, which will also have a huge impact on humanity and on the Earth, but also it will be much more massive and long-lasting harm. So today I want to explore the issue of circular economy with these business leaders who are respectively running businesses in different sectors and who are very passionate about how to introduce circular economy, not just in terms of the theory of it, but also how to implement this in their actual businesses. So I have Denise Chen here, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Melco Resorts and Entertainment. I have Henry Ho, who is the Sustainable Development Manager of Cathay Pacific. I have Kay Liu, who is the Circular Fashion Program Director of Redress. And last but not least, I have Bradley Wei, who is the CLP Innovation Director, Corporate Energy Services of CLP Holdings. So I just want to put, we won't have slides today from the speakers, we'll just have a lively conversation, hopefully. But I just want to put here, the overview and some of the hopefully learnings that we can take away today, and some action points that hopefully the delegates, all of you here, can take back to your respective organizations and think through how to implement the circular economy. So just to start, I'll start with you, Denise. At Melco, you're a hospitality company. There are so many opportunities for circular economy. Can you talk to us about what kind of opportunities your organization has identified as the lowest hanging fruits, and also, how is circularity justified from a cost perspective?
Sure, thank you. For those of you who aren't familiar, as Janet alluded to, Melco Resorts is an integrated resort developer and operator. We run resorts that run 24 hours, over 4,000 hotel rooms in Macau, the Philippines, and also in Cyprus. So in terms of our impact, it's massive when you're looking from a circular economy perspective. So when I took on this role a couple of years ago, we did exactly that, to look at areas where there was low-hanging fruit that we could address straight away. I think one of the key areas, as Grace illustrated earlier with single-use plastics, it's a big problem for us. One of the things that we're actually working on currently, which is the biggest project that we're doing right now, is looking at the single-use plastic bottles that are provided in guest rooms. And in terms of a solution, it's quite tricky to tick all the boxes, particularly now with COVID and everything that's happening. But we've commissioned and we work together with this Swedish filtration company, Nordac Fresh, to build an in-house bottling system for us to be able to clean, rebottle, and provide new filtered water in glass bottles throughout our operations in the front of house. And we're getting this delivered actually next month, so it's very exciting. And that'll take out about 13 million plastic bottles that we use annually out of the front of house. So a lot of this is quite new. I mean, it's low-hanging fruit in the sense that it's quite obvious particularly from a guest standpoint. When you walk into a hotel room, you can see, the different areas that we could address. Now, whether there's a solution for that, it's much harder to try and find something that works from, as you mentioned, from a cost perspective for us, from a luxury perspective, to meet the standards that our guests require. So that is one of the areas on plastics, and that takes us through from front all the way to the back of house areas. So through our delivery areas where plastic packaging is huge. We've actually put the onus on our suppliers. We've switched out all of delivery in single-use plastic for us to use pallets instead. So we've got plastic pallets that can be reused over and over for delivery of vegetables, etc. Again, the quantities are extremely high for us. And looking at Grace's presentation on that 2080 rule, about 40% of our total waste is food waste. So that's another area where we've put a lot of attention onto in terms of from a circular economy perspective. And over the last couple of years have put in dewatering plants to strip out the water from the food waste to reduce the volume in the first instance, and then also composting machines to be able to turn that into compost afterwards. So, I mean, in 2019, we went through, I think, about 88 tons of food waste that we managed to put through the composters. So those are kind of two of the big examples. I mean, we work all the way down to, I know some of the partners here, for example, Nespresso capsules that are used in hotel rooms to recycle, all the soap bars that you see. We work with partners there to be able to repurpose that and send that to communities in need, which is something that's very key now, obviously, with COVID.
And can I ask you a follow-up question about, from the cost perspective? I mean, how are you thinking about that? It's a very competitive industry, and you're obviously thinking kind of longer term. You have a vision for doing something different. Can you give us some visibility in terms of the cost impact, sort of in the short term and in the longer term, what you're expecting?
Sure. I think when I first took on this role, and I come from a finance background, so cost is pretty ingrained in terms of my thinking, I knew that was one of the biggest stumbling blocks, because in a lot of cases, particularly with the items that you see in hotel rooms, for example, toothbrushes, if you were to switch that out, change that to bamboo, wood, whatever it may be, the costs it's an incremental cost. And so that does meet a lot of internal resistance, as naturally it would. However, I am finding that over time, that is starting to switch. So when we looked at, for example, this bottling plant and how we were going to assess the cost for that, we looked over, I think the payback period actually really surprised all of our executive committee and our board as well. I think everyone had assumed we are switching to glass bottles. It's going to be more expensive, breakage, all this stuff. And actually it turned out the payback on that is less than 2 years.
Oh.
So it's actually, I would say in a lot of cases, it's surprising in terms of, although the upfront cost might look like it's incrementally a lot higher, when you look at payback periods and return on investments, it's actually, it works. Not in every case, but it's becoming more of, not as much of a norm as it should be, but it's becoming more popular in terms of companies looking into that, particularly in hospitality at the moment, especially with the, like in China, for example, Shanghai has got to get rid of the single-use plastic amenities that it gives to guests already this year. So because of that, it's now bringing those costs down. So I do expect it to improve over time.
Great, thanks for sharing. Let me actually move on to Henry right now. I know that Cathay has been really tackling circular economy opportunities from a number of fronts, and we have talked about you dealing with it from the food waste perspective and the plastic wrapping on cargo. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach to each of these areas I mentioned and more, and some of the outcomes that you're seeing?
Okay, sure. I'm Henry from the Cathay Pacifics group. So we are on the catering sectors. Food waste will be our major waste components that we have to tackle. So for the food waste, we have several approaches. Firstly, internally, we find that some of the fruit trimmings have a huge amount, and this is edible. So we share with our colleagues in the canteens to make sure that we won't go to dump into the landfills. And then we can also promote healthy eatings to our colleagues as well. I think that's one of the key things. And making meals that we also have some vegetable trimmings as well. So we talk with the chefs, and the chefs have some really brilliant ideas to use these kinds of trimming to make the sauces, to enhancing the food. So internally, we circular our waste in the food waste perspective. And we also have some unavoidable food waste. So those unavoidable food waste, we collected and sent to the OPAC 1, which is the government's waste to energy treatment plants. Then we also another way to circular our food waste from food waste to the energy's perspective. So this is what our catering arm's doing. For the cargo wrappings is the plastic cargo wrapping is the major waste that we are tackling on the cargo arm. So every day we have tons of cargoes, plastic wrapping using. And we find that this is an issue, and we want to tackle it to our circular approach. Back to 2014, we directly talk with the plastic wrap suppliers to see, do we have some solutions that we can reuse these kinds of contents and make it recycle plastic wrap to use it back to us. After start from 2014, we find the solutions by directly talk with the suppliers. The suppliers will collect our waste cargo plastic wraps, and in Hong Kong to make it as a recycling resin, and then make it the film again in China and ship it back to me. And so this is really a circular approach. The recycled contents for those new cargo plastic wrap is around 30%. Not totally 100% recycled materials, but it is a good start to at least involving some recycled contents within. So this is what we want to share to you guys. We can find solutions, and we need to talk with different partners to find the solutions out.
Thank you for sharing, Henry. Just a follow-on question. We know that during the pandemic, there has been a lot of changes to travel patterns, both in terms of passenger travel and also on the cargo side. And I'm just imagining, and we know the data really does suggest that the passenger traffic is way down. So I wonder how that has changed not your approach, but what have you been having to adjust your calculations in terms of on the food waste side and also on the cargo side? I would imagine there's been a surge of activity there. So it's kind of a two-track, different track development during COVID. So how have you had to adjust in terms of thinking about circularity?
I think we have to plan it from the planning side. We need to recalculate all our usage. I think reduce at source is one of the major things that we have to do. And also we have to think out of the box. and try to find out some ways that can be useful resources that we can regenerate another business, for example. We are thinking of one of the small pilot projects we are just finished, which is the waste bread to be beers projects, which is inspired by some beer companies that outside Hong Kong have some waste bread into beers. And so we find that even though down the conflict's impacts, we still have some of the bread surplus in our kitchens. So we try to collect those and see is it possible to generate our own bread taste beers from these kinds of resources and sell. Maybe it may be a win-win situation to be a new business line. This is what we are initially think of. And we start from really small projects. For example, we collect 100 breads, surplus bread from our kitchens. And finally, we find local craft beers partners and see is it possible to help us do a small amount of fermentations to make craft beers to see whether it is successful. And the project finally is successful. We made 10 bottles of beers, and which tastes good. So we will find. We hope it will be developed later, and hope maybe sometimes later next year or next year, so you guys can taste this new brand of beers from our waste bread.
Oh, that's a really interesting project and innovation, and a time when an opportunity for creativity at this challenging time. And I sure hope that I will have a chance to taste this new product. I think I'll come back to the theme of new ways of thinking, new approaches a little bit later in the panel. But now I want to go to Kay to talk a bit about the consumer side. And Kay, Redress is a company that has been thinking about sustainable fashion for a long time. You're one of the well-known firms that have really been pushing this in Hong Kong. And I just want to ask you to share a little bit about, over the past few years, have you seen a growing public awareness of thinking about fashion sustainably? Is it still a small group of people thinking about it? And what have you found to be the most effective kinds of approaches and messages in order to change people's mindset about consumption, especially in the fashion industry?
So, Redress, we are a small charity. We work to prevent and transform textile waste, including the clothing we wear every day. And in terms of raising awareness, there's something that we often do. It doesn't matter who we talk to, whether it's a 5 years old or someone in the 50s, 60s, whatever. So what is important for people to know is actually all our clothes that we wear every day. It doesn't matter whether it's a shirt, it's a shoes, or whatever. It's all made of natural resources. And a lot of people don't know, for example, the fiber of polyester, the raw material is actually oil, which is the same raw material that makes our plastic and that help us to drive our cars every single day. So just going back to basic and also telling people the impact of it. Why is it an important issue for people to understand? We often use shocking statistics. We also, reliable one has to be.
Can you share one or two of them?
Yeah, for example, our focus in textile waste, right? So in Hong Kong, we throw away 392 tons of textiles a day. And we've done, it's like, okay, what does it mean, 392 tons? We've done rough calculation, that's about 1.5, the weight of a 1.5 big Buddha. So imagine, it is huge.
Wow.
But it only accounts for about 3% of the municipal solid waste in Hong Kong. At the same time, the impact of fashion on our environment accounts for about 10% of CO2 emissions. So, therefore, like, you know, although the waste figures is small in a landfill, but the impact of the industry is enormous, and it so not make sense, like, you know, throwing things that are made of natural resources is also, I mean, fashion is a very, very long, complex process. And, you know, so therefore, like, why are we throwing useful resources away? You know, when we talk to people like that, and, you know, I think it really helps to raise awareness, but raising awareness doesn't mean that you're changing people's behavior.
Right.
I mean, that is the hardest bit, actually. I mean, we are still finding our foot, to be honest, but some of the sort of successful examples that I can share with you is showing people how to do it is really important, making it accessible. It's no point to tell people, okay, fashion's bad, bad, bad. Are you expecting people not to wear clothes? No. So how do you make it accessible for people? How do you make it something like, you know, like part of their life every day, that's something they can do? I mean, our campaign that's running this October is called Get Redress Month. And it's about that, is, you know, basically it's about using our clothes for longer, what we have already. Because, I mean, there are many surveys out there. We also done our recent survey that, you know, people just like shopping, buying clothes, and they don't like to keep them for long. That's the problem. Yeah. You know, it's like, from our recent survey, like 2 in 5 people in Hong Kong actually keep their clothes less than 1 year, you know, and they find different ways to dispose of them. So, I mean, so we really tell them sort of like the value, why is it worth keeping using our clothes for longer? And what do you gain of it from a personal perspective, and also on a bigger picture, you know, on the environmental perspective too. I mean, again, there are tons of actually really cool, good data out there to show that why it's worth changing behavior. But it is hard, definitely.
Yeah, I especially want to know, amidst the pandemic, you know, we hear a lot in the headlines, and certainly, you know, at The Economist, we talk to our readers and subscribers a lot about how, you know, there's all this consumption that has gone from in-person to online, you know, at the outset of COVID, and, you know, consumption has come back. There's a lot of pent-up demand. So, you know, that to me sounds like people are buying a lot more things. Does that work against the broader goal that you think you know, should be achieved, and how should we change the conversation there?
I think that's when circular economy kicks in, or the theory of it, you know. So, I mean, when it applies to fashion, there are many different ways of, you know, people are doing in terms of circular businesses. I mean, we are a charity, we do collect clothes, we're not a waste management company, but it's a way for us to provide solutions to show people actually, you know, because we actually sell a small portion of it. The majority of it we actually give away to local charities in Hong Kong for reuse. So we can still show people, I mean, because also like the thing is the perception of things like second-hand clothes, right? Especially in places in, you know, the Chinese society, you know, is dirty, or like, where's it from, and, you know, all this and that. So, you know, we still sort of like provide a fashion value, because we're talking about clothes. People enjoy wearing clothes for many reasons, right? So we still show that, you know, buying secondhand, wearing secondhand doesn't mean that you're looking drabby or something. You know, you can still look really cool and fashionable. So, I mean, coming back to your questions about that, you know, certainly like new business models in fashion, like, you know, rental is an interesting one. I mean, it's not popular yet, but, you know, when it comes to certain items like ski wear, you know, like, it's something that you only access maybe once or twice a year. Well, none this year, perhaps for us. So, you know, does it make sense for us to store in our small wardrobe, or does it make more sense economically and environmentally if we rent it? You know, and it's really interesting that what we're seeing a lot of brands, whether they're big brands, international, or small brands, homegrown in Hong Kong, and a lot of them are actually looking at this and also like looking at it from, it's like, what are they missing? You know, it's the same item, that how it can be used by multiple users, but they're actually helping them to maintain the profit, but it can also help them to increase the profit even, because you're increasing the number of users to access the same item. So I think that's a really interesting concept or interesting method of promoting sustainable fashion using the circular economy principles.
Great, thanks for sharing that. I want to come to you, Bradley, at CLP. I mean, CLP also has been thinking about this for a long, long, long time. And you're in an energy sector company. What do you think are the biggest opportunities right now that you see?
I work for a group called CLP Innovation, and we're committed to bringing renewable energy and decarbonization to companies. That's our main goal. And I think Kay brought up an interesting point that many textiles have got hydrocarbons in them, or an input coming from a natural resource or a raw material. To add to that, those were synthesized or combined with energy. All of our consumer goods have energy in them. So there's energy embedded in these seats, in our clothing, in our electronics, and everything that we do. So CLP's first step really is to make that energy clean and green. And that's our key challenge, is working with companies on how can you integrate renewable energy into your business. So to add to your very good point on resources, there's energy in all of our goods, and I think making people aware of that is very important. I see a very big opportunity in communicating these things openly to the public, letting consumers make choices. When you can show consumers that something is produced responsibly, green, in a sustainable fashion, a consumer can make a choice to purchase that good rather than one which is not. And I think that's a really critical juncture for us to reach, is where we can all emulate what we're doing in energy and sustainability and be able to show this and demonstrate this to consumers. So to summarize, the key opportunity that I see is really all of us as professionals in renewable energy or sustainability, wherever we work, being able to show and market what we do to consumers and empower them to make choices that help shape a cleaner, greener economy.
So from your vantage point, what are the sectors here in Hong Kong that you're working with, where you see the biggest opportunities going forward?
It's difficult to say what are the biggest opportunities. There's a lot of them. I'll zero in on what you mentioned a moment ago. You talked about online orders for various goods. So to focus on that point, you've got a data-driven business doing a bank transaction with data behind it being stored in a data center to buy goods, Alibaba or Amazon or something like this. The goods get transported, they have packaging, they arrive to someone's home. Already by the time that they have arrived in the consumer's hands, they have a tremendous amount of energy in them. From the electronic order and the electronic purchase, through the delivery, through the packaging, through the item itself. So there's lots of opportunities. I'll point to just one that's come up in this conference a number of times: packaged goods, electronic deliveries of packaged goods. As an easy example.
Great. So all of you have shared your stories and very good examples from your sectors in terms of how to promote a circular economy. I just want to kind of pick up on the point that Henry earlier talked about. He talked about innovating with new kinds of products. So I just want to go to the rest of my panelists to maybe hear about what is new, beyond what you have done, and maybe this new innovation would be connected to what you're already building on, whatever it is that you're doing. Where do you see the new opportunities, going into 2021 as we emerge from COVID? There have been some permanent changes in terms of people's consumption patterns, people's traveling patterns. What are the opportunities there, and how would your company want to capture them? Anyone? Maybe Kay?
I think when it comes to textiles and fashion, that what we're seeing innovations definitely in the materials, and also what we're seeing from, or as we're emerging, well, we're not coming out of COVID yet, but been 10 months in there, and it's hugely impacted the industry because we realize, good cannot be travel freely, and like you don't have the people to make the garments, etc., and also realize where raw materials is from. Majority of materials is from China, it's produced in China. So, I mean, that's conventional materials. So therefore, like, there are different things like, the sustainability factor, and also looking at the supply chain of fashion and textiles. Things need to change, right? So what we're seeing is a lot of really innovative ideas in terms of materials. Like they're using byproducts from another industry to create fibers, to create vegan type of leather. Like, for example, there's the what they call the brand Pinatex, that is from the pineapple leaves that turn into plant-based leather. That's really interesting. And also innovations in the process of making clothes, because traditionally it's heavily damaging the environment. So that, and also like all these business models, or the circular business models that I was talking about, I think that area is going to grow, especially the second-hand and re-commerce model, because it's still, I live in the UK for many years. Like second-hand shops, for example, is something that's so easy to access. But it's something you still owe, like second-hand shop. You don't see the fashion value of it. So I think that needs to grow, and that is really changing. For example, who was it, like Gucci, for example, they're launching their second-hand lines like last week. That is really quite exciting, isn't it? It's not something that you would have imagined 10 years ago. And then, so that, I think, there are loads of opportunities, loads of great innovations that's happening in the fashion sector. But what it needs, actually, coming back to the consumer point of view, it needs us to support that to happen. Because like we have all this innovation, but if no one's supporting it, no one's buying it, it's not going to happen, is it? It's not going to stay.
Yeah, no, that's a very exciting initiative that you're talking about. And I would think that to sort of the mainstream consumers, that really matters, right? Having a brand names that they know, be it, a luxury brand, or mass market fashion brands, high street fashion brands, really saying, we're going to commit to this and we're going to make it happen, then it really does broaden the appeal to consumers.
Yeah, I think I'd follow up a little bit on that. I think in our industry, we face the challenge that I think the perception is, and I think particularly this might be certainly stronger in Asia, that where you're trying to make something sustainable, especially when it comes to in hotel rooms, you're taking away from the guest. I think there's a perception that sustainability naturally means you can't really marry sustainability and luxury together. So I mean, my hope is that with COVID, with all of these issues kind of becoming more prevalent, hopefully that puts more awareness into the consumer, so that this drives more and more of companies within our industry in that luxury bracket to start looking at how we can innovate more products in the circular economy to make sure that it still meets the standard of luxury that the guests require, but is also sustainable.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that's a huge opportunity. When people travel, of course, has been really hard hit with COVID, but when borders start opening up again, or travel bubbles opening up again, people are, going back to leisure travel again. Hopefully, they will see things with new eyes as well, and try to, accept, new kinds of sustainability initiatives and think of them differently. And it is an opportunity, clearly, also for, you as a company to sort of take this as a point of reset for how you serve your customers. So that's really interesting. Henry, you want to go back? I want to go back to you and also ask if when passenger travel restarts and people get back on planes again, what are some of the things that your company or your division would do differently? Either in the food waste sector or just to my point about this great reset. What are some of the areas you think that you can make your customers see with new eyes in terms of greater sustainability and promoting the circular economy?
I think I would like to echo what Grace said. The SUP issues will be one of the greatest issues that we want to tackle in the next few years. And as Grace already mentions in her presentation, so we are already revisiting those customer-facing equipments, those single-use plastic equipments. And also what I said that we want to jump out of the box, like the bread to beers concepts, the waste bread to beers concepts, and we want to use those as a showcase or items to make the customer think that we are already prepared, or we are going to make the leadership, or we want to make the change on the circular economy aspect.
Great. We're getting a lot of questions. I want to get to some of the audience questions here, and please continue to submit them. I want to maybe start with Bradley. What do you think is the biggest barrier to achieving circularity in Hong Kong? I mean, you're talking about some new opportunities that are coming online, and new opportunities to tackle this issue. But what are the barriers?
That's interesting. I think one barrier is what is the solution? There are many solutions, and they address individual points. And I think that a lot of companies and people are looking for a single solution or something which has a breadth to it. And I think that right now we have some solutions in plastic, some solutions in food, some solutions in various areas. And I think that there is some waiting and seeing particularly from large corporates on will there be one way to capture all of these together. And that's not easy, but I do see evidence of a wait and see behavior, which I think makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So from the ones you mentioned, I mean, what would be your priority? I mean, what would be the more effective in terms of maybe as a start?
In terms of waste?
In terms of these solutions, I mean, you were saying that people have multiple kinds of solutions to these challenges. What do you think can most move things forward and make a big change?
I think that rather than stating what the solution would be, I'd like to state two components that a solution could have or should have. And one is customer awareness. One is be able to put sustainability and corporate social responsibility into your brand. If you're going to go through the efforts to do it, I think you deserve to have it in your brand and in your marketing. And I think it's important that you can monetize your efforts and put decision-making in the hands of the consumer. So I think that's one part to it, to what a solution would look like. I think a second part to what a solution would look like is that the business model is not static. You can work with the business model to fit it to your resorts, or to a textile company, or to the fashion industry, or to the airline industry. The solution needs to be able to work with various businesses because they're all different. It won't be plug and play from the start. It needs to have some dynamicism to it.
Great, thank you. There are a couple of questions from Cathay. I'll just ask them for Cathay. I'll ask them to you together, and as we are running out of time. One question is, what stops Cathay from using paper cups instead of plastic and wooden/bamboo cutlery? If airline tickets will become $3 to $5 more expensive because of that, it's not too significant a price change for travelers. Another question is about the recycling loop of cargo wraps at Cathay. Do you have any kind of data points to share on the carbon emissions of transportation in this particular loop?
I think I would try to answer the cargo wrapping first. So for the cargo wrappings, we have some, we haven't done some carbon emissions data now, but I can share some collection data that to you all. So in 2019, we collect over 200 tons of waste cargo wrappings and sent to our suppliers to make the recycled plastic vaccines and turn it back to our cargo wrappings for our use. And this is the data that we have for the recycle, and this is huge because it's over 200 tons a year. It's over 200 tons a year. So this is what I can share of. With regarding to the paper cups, I think later on, we are reviewing, as Grace's presentation, we are reviewing the plastic cup usage. We are reviewing plastic cup usage. And as I know, we are thinking of changing the plastic cups into the paper cups.
Oh, okay.
We are thinking of it.
That's good to know. I think the person who asked you the question will be quite happy to hear that.
Yeah, we are thinking of it. So
Great.
in a short run, if the aviation's back, if you can travel by our flights, I'm pretty sure you will see these changes soon.
Great. Well, I just want to wrap up by saying that our panelists today have shared a lot of interesting anecdotes from their respective perspective in the different sectors about how to, in their whole value chain, think about circular economy and more effective and less intensive use of resources. And so, I hope that those of you who have the opportunity to interact with some of these companies in your lives and your work will see some of the fruits of their labor very soon. And COVID has offered huge opportunities for all of us, whether we are producers or consumers or people running businesses, to really rethink how we're using resources. And it could be if not once in a lifetime, once in many decades opportunity really for a great reset. And I hope there will be a lot of opportunities that comes out of what would otherwise have been a really big challenge with COVID. So with that, I just want to thank all of the panelists, and thanks to all of you here and those of you online for listening to this panel. Thank you very much.